an inquiry into the causes and effects of the Variolæ Vaccinæ. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jordan Watts, Oxfordshire. An inquiry into the causes and effects of the Variolæ Vaccinæ by Edward Jenner, M.D., F.R.S., etc. Publication 1. An inquiry into the causes and effects of the Variolæ Vaccinæ, a disease discovered in some of the western counties of England, particularly Gloucestershire, and known by the name of the Cow-Pox. The deviation of man from the state in which he was originally placed by nature seems to have proved to him a prolific source of diseases. From the love of splendour, from the indulgences of luxury, and from his fondness for amusement, he has familiarised himself with a great number of animals, which may not originally have been intended for his associates. The wolf, disarmed of ferocity, is now pillowed in the lady's lap. Footnote. The late Mr. John Hunter proved by experiments that the dog is the wolf in a degenerated state. End of footnote. The cat, the little tiger of our island, whose natural home is the forest, is equally domesticated and caressed. The cow, the hog, the sheep, and the horse are all, for a variety of purposes, brought under his care and dominion. There is a disease to which the horse, from his state of domestication, is frequently subject. The farriers have termed it the grease. It is an inflammation and swelling in the heel, accompanied at its commencement with small cracks or fissures, from which issues a limpid fluid, possessing properties of a very peculiar kind. This fluid seems capable of generating a disease in the human body, after it has undergone the modification I shall presently speak of, which bears so strong a resemblance to the smallpox that I think it highly probable it may be the source of that disease. In this dairy country a great number of cows are kept, and the office of milking is performed indiscriminately by men and maidservants. One of the former having been appointed to apply dressings to the heels of a horse affected with the malady I have mentioned, and not paying due attention to cleanliness, incautiously bears his part in milking the cows, with some particles of the infectious matter adhering to his fingers. When this is the case, it frequently happens that a disease is communicated to the cows, and from the cows to the dairymaids, which spreads through the farm until most of the cattle and domestics feel its unpleasant consequences. This disease has obtained the name of the Cow-Pox. It appears on the nipples of the cows in the form of irregular pustules. At their first appearance they are commonly of a palish blue, or rather of a colour somewhat approaching to livid, and are surrounded by an inflammation. These pustules, unless a timely remedy be applied, frequently degenerate into phagedenic ulcers, which prove extremely troublesome. Footnote. They who attend sick cattle in this country find a speedy remedy for stopping the progress of this complaint in those applications which act chemically upon the morbid matter, such as the solutions of the Vitriolum zinci, the Vitriolum cupri, etc. End of footnote. The animals become indisposed, and the secretion of milk is much lessened. Inflamed spots now begin to appear on different parts of the hands of the domestics employed in milking, and sometimes on the wrists, which run on to suppuration, first assuming the appearance of the small vesicles produced by a burn. Most commonly they appear about the joints of the fingers and at their extremities, but whatever parts are affected, if the situation will admit, these superficial suppurations put on a circular form, with their edges more elevated than their centre, and of a colour distantly approaching to blue. Absorption takes place, and tumours appear in each axilla. The system becomes affected, the pulse is quickened, shiverings succeeded by heat, general lassitude, and pains about the loins and limbs, with vomiting, come on. The head is painful, and the patient is now and then even affected with delirium. Footnote: It will appear in the sequel that these symptoms arise principally from the irritation of the sores, and not from the primary action of the vaccine virus upon the constitution. These symptoms, varying in their degrees of violence, generally continue from 1 day to 3 or 4, leaving ulcerated sores about the hands, which, from the sensibility of the parts, are very troublesome, and commonly heal slowly, frequently becoming phagedænic, like thofe from whence they sprung. During the progress of the difeafe, the lips, nostrils, eyelids, and other parts of the body are fometimes affected with fores, but thefe evidently arife from their being heedlessly rubbed or fcratched with the patient's infected fingers. No eruptions on the skin have followed the decline of the feverifh symptoms in any inftance that has come under my infpection, one only excepted, and in this cafe a very few appeared on the arms. They were very minute, of a vivid red colour, and foon died away without advancing to maturation, fo that I cannot determine whether they had any connection with the preceding symptoms. Thus the difeafe makes its progrefs from the horfe, as I conceive, to the nipple of the cow, and from the cow to the human subject. Morbid matter of various kinds, when absorbed into the fyftem, may produce effects in fome degree fimilar, but what renders the Cow-Pox virus fo extremely singular is, that the perfon who has been thus affected is for ever after fecure from the infection of the Small Pox, neither expofure to the variolous effluvia, nor the infertion of the matter into the fkin, producing this diftemper. In fupport of fo extraordinary a fact, I fhall lay before my readers a great number of inftances; but firft it is neceffary to obferve, that puftulous fores frequently appear fpontaneoufly on the nipples of the cows, and inftances have occurred, though very rarely, of the hands of the fervants employed in milking being affected with fores in confequence, and even of their feeling an indifpofition from absorption. Thefe puftules are of a much milder nature than thofe which arife from that contagion which conftitutes the true Cow Pox. They are always free from the bluifh or livid tint fo conspicuous in the puftules in that difeafe. No eryfipelas attends them, nor do they shew any phagedænic difpofition, as in the other cafe, but quickly terminate in a scab without creating any apparent diforder in the cow. This complaint appears at various feafons of the year, but moft commonly in the fpring, when the cows are firft taken from their winter food and fed with grafs. It is very apt to appear alfo when they are fuckling their young, but this difeafe is not to be considered as fimilar in any refpect to that of which I am treating, as it is incapable of producing any fpecific effects on the human conftitution. However, it is of the greatest confequence to point it out here, left the want of discrimination fhould occafion an idea of fecurity from the infection of the Small Pox, which might prove delufive. Case I. Joseph Merret, now an under gardener to the Earl of Berkeley, lived as a fervant with a farmer near this place in the year 1770, and occafionally affifted in milking his mafter's cows. Several horfes belonging to the farm began to have fore heels, which Merret frequently attended. The cows foon became affected with the Cow Pox, and foon after feveral fores appeared on his hands. Swellings and ftiffnefs in each axilla followed, and he was fo much indifpofed for several days as to be incapable of purfuing his ordinary employment. Previoufly to the appearance of the diftemper among the cows, there was no frefh cow brought into the farm, nor any fervant employed who was affected with the Cow Pox. In April 1795, a general inoculation taking place here, Merret was inoculated with his family, fo that a period of 25 years had elapsed from him having the Cow Pox to this time. However, though the variolous matter was repeatedly inferted into his arm, I found it impracticable to infect him with it, an efflorefcence only, taking on an eryfipelatous look about the centre, appearing on the fkin near the punctured parts. During the whole time that his family had the smallpox, one of whom had it very full, he remained in the house with them, but received no injury from exposure to the contagion. It is necessary to observe that the utmost care was taken to ascertain, with the most scrupulous precision, that no one whose case is here adduced had gone through the smallpox previous to these attempts to produce that difeafe. Had thefe experiments been conducted in a large city, or in a populous neighbourhood, fome doubts might have been entertained; but here, where population is thin, and where fuch an event as a perfon having had the Small Pox is always faithfully recorded, no rifk of inaccuracy in this particular can arife. Case II. Sarah Portlock, of this place, was infected with the Cow Pox when a fervant at a farmer's in the neighbourhood, 27 years ago. I have purpofely feledted feveral cafes in which the difeafe had appeared at a very diftant period previous to the experiments made with variolous matter, to shew that the change produced in the conftitution is not affedted by time. In the year 1792, conceiving herfelf, from this circumstance, fecure from the infection of the Small Pox, fhe nurfed one of her own children who had accidentally caught the difeafe, but no indifpofition enfued. During the time fhe remained in the infected room, variolous matter was inferted into both her arms, but without any further effect than in the preceding cafe. Case III. John Phillips, a tradesman of this town, had the Cow Pox at fo early a period as 9 years of age. At the age of 62 I inoculated him, and was very careful in feledting matter in its moft active ftate. It was taken from the arm of a boy juft before the commencement of the eruptive fever, and inftantly inferted. It very speedily produced a fting-like feel in the part. An efflorefcence appeared, which on the 4th day was rather extenfive, and fome degree of pain and ftiffness were felt about the shoulder; but on the 5th day the fymptoms began to difappear, and in a day or two after went entirely off, without producing any effect on the fyftem. Case IV. Mary Barge, of Woodford, in this parifh, was inoculated with variolous matter in the year 1791. An efflorefcence of a palifh red colour foon appeared about the parts where the matter was inferted, and fpread itself rather extenfively, but died away in a few days without producing any variolous fymptoms. It is remarkable that variolous matter, when the fyftem is difpofed to reject it, should excite inflammation on the parts to which it is applied more fpeedily than when it produces the Small Pox. Indeed, it becomes almost a criterion by which we can determine whether the infection will be received or not. It seems as if a change, which endures through life, had been produced in the action, or difpofition to adtion, in the veffels of the skin; and it is remarkable too, that whether this change has been effedted by the Small Pox or the Cow Pox, that the difpofition to fudden cuticular inflammation is the fame on the application of variolous matter. She has fince been repeatedly employed as a nurfe to Small Pox patients, without experiencing any ill confequences. This woman had the Cow Pox when fhe lived in the fervice of a farmer in this parifh 31 years before. Case V. Mrs. H., a respectable gentlewoman of this town, had the Cow Pox when very young. She received the infection in a manner that is not common. It was given by means of her handling fome of the fame utensils which were in ufe among the fervants of her family, who had the difeafe from milking infected cows. When the Cow Pox has prevailed in the dairy, it has often been communicated to thofe who have not milked the cows by the handle of the milk pail. Her hands had many of the Cow Pox fores upon them, and they were communicated to her nofe, which became inflamed and very much fwollen. Soon after this event, Mrs. H. was expofed to the contagion of the Small Pox, where it was scarcely poffible for her to have escaped had fhe been fufceptible of it, as fhe regularly attended a relative who had the difeafe in fo violent a degree that it proved fatal to him. In the year 1778 the smallpox prevailed very much at Berkeley, and Mrs. H not feeling perfectly satisfied respecting her safety, no indisposition having followed her exposure to the smallpox, I inoculated her with active variolous matter. The fame appearance followed as in the preceding cafes, an efflorefcence on the arm without any effect on the constitution. Case 6. It is a fact so well known among our dairy farmers, that thofe who have had the Small Pox either efcape the Cow Pox, or are difpofed to have it flightly, that as foon as the complaint fhews itself among the cattle, affiftants are procured, if poffible, who are thus rendered lefs fufceptible of it, otherwife the bufinefs of the farm could fcarcely go forwards. In the month of May 1796 the Cow Pox broke out at Mr. Baker's, a farmer who lives near this place. The difeafe was communicated by means of a cow which was purchased in an infedted ftate at a neighbouring fair, and not one of the farmer's cows, confifting of 30, which were at that time milked efcaping the contagion. The family confifted of a man fervant, 2 dairy maids, and a fervant boy, who, with the farmer himfelf, were twice a day employed in milking the cattle. The whole of this family, except Sarah Wynne, one of the dairy maids, had gone through the Small Pox. The confequence was, that the farmer and the fervant boy efcaped the infection of the Cow Pox entirely, and the fervant man and one of the maid fervants had each of them nothing more than a fore on one of their fingers, which produced no diforder in the fyftem. But the other dairy maid, Sarah Wynne, who never had the Small Pox, did not efcape in fo eafy a manner. She caught the complaint from the cows, and was affedted with the fymptoms defcribed in the 5th page in fo violent a degree, that she was confined to her bed, and rendered incapable for feveral days of purfuing her ordinary vocations in the farm. March 28th, 1797, I inoculated this girl, and carefully rubbed the variolous matter into 2 flight incifions made upon the left arm. A little inflammation appeared in the ufual manner around the part where the matter was inferted, but fo early as the 5th day it vanifhed entirely without producing any effect on the fyftem. Case 7. Although the preceding hiftory pretty clearly evinces that the conftitution is far lefs fufceptible of the contagion of the Cow Pox after it has felt that of the Small Pox, and although in general, as I have obferved, they who have had the Small Pox, and are employed in milking cows which are infedted with the Cow Pox, either efcape the diforder, or have fores on the hands without feeling any general indifpofition, yet the animal economy is fubjedt to fome variation in this refpect, which the following relation will point out. In the fummer of the year 1796 the Cow Pox appeared at the farm of Mr. Andrews, a considerable dairy adjoining to the town of Berkeley. It was communicated, as in the preceding inftance, by an infedted cow purchased at a fair in the neighbourhood. The family confifted of the farmer, his wife, 2 fons, a man and a maid fervant, all of whom, except the farmer, who was fearful of the confequences, bore a part in milking the cows. The whole of them, exclufive of the man fervant, had regularly gone through the Small Pox, but in this cafe no one who milked the cows efcaped the contagion. All of them had fores upon their hands, and fome degree of general indifpofition, preceded by pains and tumours in the axillae. But there was no comparifon in the feverity of the difeafe as it was felt by the fervant man, who had efcaped the Small Pox, and by thofe of the family who had not, for, while he was confined to his bed, they were able, without much inconvenience, to follow their ordinary bufinefs. February the 13th, 1797, I availed myself of an opportunity of inoculating William Rodway, the fervant man above alluded to. Variolous matter was inferted into both his arms, in the right by means of superficial incifions, and into the left by flight punctures into the cutis. Both were perceptibly inflamed on the 3rd day. After this the inflammation about the punctures soon died away, but a fmall appearance of eryfipelas was manifeft about the edges of the incifions till the 8th day, when a little uneasiness was felt for the space of half an hour in the right axilla. The inflammation then hastily disappeared without producing the most distant mark of affection of the system. Case 8. Elizabeth Wynne, aged 57, lived as a servant with a neighbouring farmer 38 years ago. She was then a dairymaid, and the cow-pox broke out among the cows. She caught the disease with the rest of the family, but compared with them had it in a very slight degree, one very small sore only breaking out on the little finger of her left hand, and scarcely any perceptible indisposition following it. As the malady had shewn itself in so slight a manner, and as it had taken place at so distant a period of her life, I was happy with the opportunity of trying the effects of variolous matter upon her constitution, and on the 28th of March, 1797, I inoculated her by making 2 superficial incisions on the left arm, on which the matter was cautiously rubbed. A little efflorefcence soon appeared, and a tingling sensation was felt about the parts where the matter was inserted until the 3rd day, when both began to subside, and so early as the 5th day it was evident that no indisposition would follow. Case 9. Although the cow-pox shields the constitution from the smallpox, and the smallpox provides a protection against its own future poison, yet it appears that the human body is again and again susceptible of the infectious matter of the cow-pox, as the following history will demonstrate. William Smith, of Purton, in this parish, contracted this difease when he lived with a neighbouring farmer in the year 1780. One of the horses belonging to the farm had fore heels, and it fell to his lot to attend him. By thefe means the infection was carried to the cows, and from the cows it was communicated to Smith. On one of his hands were feveral ulcerated fores, and he was affected with fuch fymptoms as have been before described. In the year 1791 the cow-pox broke out at another farm where he then lived as a fervant, and he became affected with it a fecond time, and in the year 1794 he was fo unfortunate as to catch it again. The difeafe was equally as fevere the fecond and 3rd time as it was on the firft. This is not the cafe in general. A fecond attack is commonly very flight, and fo, I am informed, it is among the cows. The reader will find further obfervations on this subject in the fequel. Thefe repeated indifpofitions muft have arifen from the local irritation, and not from the fpecific action of the vaccine virus. In the fpring of the year 1795 he was twice inoculated, but no affection of the fyftem could be produced from the variolous matter, and he is fince affociated with thofe who had the Small Pox in its moft contagious ftate without feeling any effect from it. Case 10. Simon Nichols lived as a fervant with Mr. Bromedge, a gentleman who refides on his own farm in this parifh, in the year 1782. He was employed in applying dreffings to the fore heels of one of his mafter's horfes, and at the fame time affifted in milking the cows. The cows became affected in confequence, but the difeafe did not shew itself on their nipples till feveral weeks after he had begun to drefs the horfe. He quitted Mr. Bromedge's fervice, and went to another farm without any fores upon him, but here his hands foon began to be affected in the common way, and he was much indifpofed with the ufual fymptoms. Concealing the nature of the malady from Mr. Cole, his new mafter, and being there alfo employed in milking, the cow-pox was communicated to the cows. Soon afterwards Nichols was employed in a farm where the Small Pox broke out, when I inoculated him with feveral other patients, with whom he continued during the whole time of their confinement. His arm inflamed, but neither the inflammation nor his affociating with the inoculated family produced the leaft effect upon his constitution. Case 11. William Stinchcombe was a fellow fervant with Nichols at Mr. Bromedge's farm, at the time the cattle had the cow-pox, and he was unfortunately infected by them. His left hand was very feverely affected with feveral corroding ulcers, and a tumour of considerable size appeared in the axilla of that side. His right hand had only one small fore upon it, and no tumour difcovered itself in the correfponding axilla. In the year 1792 Stinchcombe was inoculated with variolous matter, but no confequences enfued beyond a little inflammation in the arm for a few days. A large party were inoculated at the fame time, fome of whom had the difeafe in a more violent degree than is commonly feen from inoculation. He purpofely affociated with them, but could not receive the Small Pox. During the fickening of fome of his companions, their fymptoms fo ftrongly recalled to his mind his own ftate when fickened with the Cow Pox, that he very pertinently remarked their ftriking fimilarity. Case 12. The paupers of the village of Tortworth in this county were inoculated by Mr. Henry Jenner, furgeon of Berkeley, in the year 1795. Among them 8 patients prefented themfelves who had at different periods of their lives had the Cow Pox. One of them, Hester Walkley, I attended with that difeafe when fhe lived in the fervice of a farmer in the fame village in the year 1782, but neither this woman, nor any other of the patients who had gone through the Cow Pox, received the variolous infection either from the arm or from mixing in the fociety of the other patients who were inoculated at the fame time. This ftate of fecurity proved a fortunate circumftance, as many of the poor women were at the fame time in a ftate of pregnancy.